When it comes to selling final expense life insurance, probably the most difficult part of the final expense sales process is the actual field underwriting. In this training video, you're going to hear one of our weekly live training calls. You'll learn the basics of field underwriting along with 6 of the most common health conditions that we see on a daily basis. Coming up next. Just in case we haven't met, my name is Douglas Massi, and I want to welcome you guys to our YouTube channel, Final Expense Trainer. If you're new to our channel, feel free to subscribe as we're putting out a lot of true final expense sales training videos on a regular basis. Once you've subscribed to our channel, go ahead and click on that little bell-looking thing that's right down there next to the subscribe button. This will actually allow us to notify you each time we put out one of our true final expense sales training videos. With all that being said, let's get into the training call. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the call. Today's call, we're going to go over field underwriting, and what we're going to talk about is really a couple of different things. I'm going to go over like 5 or 6 of the most common ailments that we run into. The main thing about this call that we're going to go over is what you should be doing, the tools you should be using while you're sitting down with every prospect, otherwise known as field underwriting. We all have several tools that can be used in the field with every single prospect that you meet. Most important, always, and I'm just going to say this right from the start before I even get into this, always make sure you get the client up off the couch to go grab all the medications and or the medication list. See, I like it when they have the medication list and they give me the medications, because I can say, well, are you still taking all these? Are you still taking this one? When were you first prescribed that one? Etc. That's going to make sure that you do your field underwriting correctly, because with all medications, we always want to know what they're taking it for. So we're going to ask them, and then we're going to double check that the medication is actually for that ailment. We always want to know the dosage, and we always want to know when they started taking the medication. And a lot of medications, I ask them, well, Mrs. Jones, when you first started taking this medication, did they switch you from another one? So, because you'll hear clients, for example, that'll tell you, they've tried different blood thinners. They've tried different high blood pressure medications. So sometimes the doctor takes them off one and puts them on a different one. So we want to know as much information as possible. This is all part of doing field underwriting. So always get them off the couch. Go grab the medication, Mrs. Jones. Is there any old bottles you have laying around? Bring those too. Everybody on this call, I should say our contracted agents on this call, has an updated cheat sheet, or you should have an updated cheat sheet. I know we updated it a few months ago, maybe about 6 months ago or so. So the cheat sheet, remember, all that cheat sheet does is it helps to give you some direction as to what carrier you may want to look at depending on the health situation. So if you're brand spanking new and you're really concentrating on one carrier at a time, the cheat sheet can still help you, because it may actually say, oh, well, this client's going to be graded with this product that I'm learning. So keep that in mind. That cheat sheet is something you should all have with you. You should be using if need be. Absolutely. Now, another one of the tools that we all have is the medical questions page. And that's the little page that everybody should have, that we ask for their date of birth, their height, their weight, if they've used any tobacco products over the past 12 months. And the nice thing about that thing is we ask a bunch of basic health questions so that we're prepared, and that's where we write down all the medication also. If you're using this medical question page correctly, by the time you get to the bottom of it, you should know what form of payment the client's going to use. To me, that is part of field underwriting, because the last thing you want to do is give a client that has, let's say they don't have a checking account and they use Direct Express, the last thing you want to do is give them prices from a carrier that doesn't take direct express. All part of the underwriting. So during our training, for those of you who are new, I know I asked at one point in the training for you to make sure you have a main product, a primary carrier, a secondary carrier, and a guaranteed issue carrier. In most cases, one of those products should be taken direct express because we do run into a lot of those. A lot of times the clients have a checking account, but they pull out a debit card. Now, if you're using a carrier that takes that debit card, I'm telling you right now, don't do it. If you know they got a checking account, you do whatever. If you have to run them to the bank to get the darn account number, do that over taking a debit card. Because the debit cards, man, I'm telling you, sometimes they just don't go through. To me, they're the kiss of death. Even when I get a client that I am comfortable with, like she just can't find the darn bank statement. She doesn't write checks, so she doesn't have any, and you can't find the account number on any paperwork. You're kind of like, ugh. And then you get tempted to take these debit cards. Every time, it seems like most of the times I've taken these debit cards, it's like, boom, they were useless. It didn't go through. There was a problem. Debit cards are the kiss of death because people lose debit cards and people change debit cards all the time. Taking a debit card is not going to work. I am telling you. Always, always, always get the checking or savings account number. Now, moving right along. Each carrier has either their own medication knockout list. In other words, each product that we sell, it either has a medication knockout list or a medication guide that actually shows a lot of, in these medication guides, a lot of these companies have a lot of medications listed and how they view them. So the nice thing about these medication guides, I keep a bunch of them with me. I keep Transamerica, Americo, Security National Life with me at all times. Forrester's has a good one too. So if you're keeping all the carriers' medication lists with you, even if you're writing, let's say, okay, here's a great example. Even if you're writing Royal Neighbors, they don't have a medication list. They have a knockout guide. So even if you're writing Royal Neighbors, you're looking at Royal Neighbors for this client. When you're looking up the medications, one of the tools you can use is like the Americo medication guide or the Transamerica medication guide or Forrester's or Security National Life, what have you. So remember, these are all tools that you can use. Just because you're not going with Americo doesn't mean you can't pull out the list because it says what warfarin is. It says what warfarin's used for. It says what OxyContin is. It says a lot of these basic stuff. So, that's just one of the tools. And to me, of course, the ultimate tool is Google. Thanks to Google, there is never an excuse for anybody on this call to ever leave the client's house without knowing exactly what a medication is for. Every single medication is on Google. And so you can literally say, hey, Google, what's clopidogrel for? And it'll tell you. You could sit there and listen to it with your client while they talk about it as being a blood thinner if you use the Hey Google. So, and finally, if all else fails, you can either call me, which is what I mentioned. That's when you want to call me, or the carriers, because there's going to be times when you've got a specific situation and a medication that's kind of weird, like Xarelto is a weird blood thinner. It's not a super common one. It's all the carriers kind of look at some of the blood thinners differently. So a lot of times you might be better off just calling the carrier, calling the underwriter and asking for an underwriting assessment while you're sitting there with your client. The most important thing is that you give them the right price for the right product. Every new agent goes through a stage where they're trying to give everybody preferred or standard rates, and then what happens is it seems like 1 out of 3, or in some cases, half the time, if not more, the client gets offered graded. And a lot of times it comes down to your field underwriting. You've got to be strong with these people. You have got to know exactly what the medication is for. Don't say, hey, Mrs. Jones, what's this clopidogrel for? And then they'll say high blood pressure. Oh, okay, and just believe them. Don't do that. Don't do that. This is the United States, guys. Believe them, but verify. Look it up. Make sure that they're right. Because let me tell you, I'm 50, and as I get older, my thinking's changing a little bit. I'm not as quick as I was 5-10 years ago. A good example of that is 5 years ago, I could write 300, 400,000 in premium every year. Now it's not as easy. It's a lot of work. Well, I can't do it with the agency, but my point is, I'm not as fast. I'm not as quick. I can't put in the long hours like I was able to do just a few years ago. So, my point is, do everything you can, verify no matter what before you leave the client's house. Make sure you've given them the right product based on their health. And if you're not sure, then give them the darn graded if you have to. And then try to get them approved with a preferred product. So like if I'm not doing a phone interview, what I'll do a lot of times is I'm thinking to myself, I might be able to give them first day coverage with this one carrier. I'll use Security National Life as an example, but they may just offer graded. So what I do is I price them with the Security National Life graded or modified product. That way, if it comes back as graded, I was right. But if it comes back as preferred or standard, hey, I'm coming back as a hero. Guess what, Mrs. Jones? For that $56 instead of $10,000 in coverage, I'm giving you an additional $2,000. So you're going to be covered for $12,000. How's that? They love that stuff. Make yourself the hero. Think ahead. Another thing that I think is very smart to do in the house, if you're just not 100% sure, is to have them sign a second application. So if I'm looking at two products, I think I can give them first day coverage with this product, but I might have to go to this graded or modified product over here. What I'll do is I'll give them the price of the more expensive product, and I'll have them sign both applications. And I'll even leave them with both brochures, and I'll get their permission. Mrs. Jones, as I said before, my objective is to get you the best deal possible. Do you have a problem with me sending in a couple of different applications to make sure I do that for you? They're going to be like, no, please, thank you. That's how you stand by your clients and do the right thing for them. So real quick, guys, like I said, we're not gonna milk this call. I do want to go over some of the more common health situations for those of you who are newbies and people that have been maybe, in life insurance or in health insurance sales for a while, but you're kind of just making that move to our market. So probably the most common thing you're going to see is high blood pressure, which is never going to be an issue as long as it's regulated correctly. In most cases, it doesn't matter. If they're taking medicine for high blood pressure, it doesn't matter. It's fine. And also diabetes, where they're just taking the pills, metformin, glyburide, glipizide. These are all going to be non-issues for all the carriers. But let me just say, because what happens is there's different types of diabetes. And what happens once their diabetes starts to get worse, they go on insulin, but there's also different types of diabetes. So I'm just going to touch on this real quick for a second. So here's what I'm doing. I am Googling diabetes. Okay. So a group of diseases that result in too much sugar in the blood, high blood glucose. And then there are actually 4 different types that pop up. So the most common type, and this is the non-issue, is type 2 diabetes, a chronic condition that affects the way the body processes blood sugar. Then you've got type 1 diabetes, which is a little different because this condition, people that have type 1 diabetes have it because their pancreas is not functioning correctly and it's producing very little or no insulin. Therefore, they need the insulin. And some people have it real bad where they're taking insulin multiple times a day. We've seen people that have that. And then you've got pre-diabetes. I'm surprised this is even here. I've always thought pre-diabetes is something that a term the doctors use or that the clients tell us, which is basically when they have high blood sugar, but not high enough to have type 2 diabetes. In other words, it's like just before, it's like if they're not careful, they're going to end up a diabetic. And then if they don't control their diabetes, it will go to type 1. In many cases, it gets worse because your body starts to give up on you. And, let me just say this. As we get older, I mentioned high blood pressure as being a non-issue. This is kind of, let me just give you a step ladder to diabetes. So here's how it starts. Diabetes, first, what most people do is they end up getting high cholesterol. So that's me right now. I got high cholesterol. Then what happens if they don't take care of their cholesterol? If they don't make changes in their diet and the way they live their lives, what happens is high blood pressure. Then from there, as it gets worse, it goes to type 2 diabetes, then type 1 diabetes. So that's the process, and then it gets worse. I'm going to share with you a little story of a worst case scenario. So diabetics on insulin. Make sure you know what you're going to do with the insulin diabetic. In other words, which carrier you're going to use for them. Always know how much insulin they're using and how long they've been using it for. And the reason being, with this underwriting, let me just touch on this whole insulin diabetic. Once they become an insulin diabetic, that's when they start having issues. One of the most common one is neuropathy. So once they get neuropathy, it's like the diabetes is getting out of control. And so you want to make sure, that's one of the things I love about Royal Neighbors is if you've got an insulin diabetic who has neuropathy, Royal Neighbors will still give them first day coverage. It's just like it's their super niche. They don't ask for the bill. They don't care about the height or weight. So they can be 3 feet tall and weigh 2,000 pounds. They're not going to ask. So, and they can still get first day coverage if they are an insulin diabetic with neuropathy. What happens is this. Diabetics, the diabetes, one of the aspects of the disease is that it doesn't help, it doesn't allow the person to heal very well. So, and then it gets worse, and that's when the neuropathy happens. That's when the client stubs their toe, and then it doesn't heal right, and the next thing you know, it starts to, I hate to say this, rot, and the next thing you know, it's amputated. So here's the story I wanted to mention with you. So I go down the block. When I get out of my neighborhood, I have to pull up to a stop sign that's right in front of a little store. So for years, I've been driving this route, years and years. We're talking 20 plus years. So there's a gentleman years ago, he would walk to the store and to get his beer and hang out. And he'd hang out by the store. And then I noticed, I'd seen him for years. Then I noticed the guy's using a walker. And then a few years ago, it went to a wheelchair. So now, let me describe this guy. Now, he's got a leg amputated and a foot amputated. He still hangs out at the store. I see him in the wheelchair there drinking beer. So let me just say this. That is the typical diabetes. That is what happens with folks that don't take care of their diabetes. And alcohol is really bad for diabetes. It's just poisoning the body that much faster. And what happens is the body parts will fall off. Okay? So asthma and COPD. Let's move right along. A lot of people are either going to have asthma or a more chronic breathing problem. And you're going to see this a lot. A good field underwriting, if you're doing your job, a good field underwriter can determine which they have. And, it's so funny because it really comes down to the medication they're taking. Most carriers don't really care about asthma, not an issue, but they all care about it once it becomes chronic. So make sure you know what carriers you're using for people with COPD, what product you're selling. And if you're brand spanking new, don't worry too much about it. Just concentrate on learning your main carrier and how they view it. Here's a tip though. Most people will say that they have asthma. Not most people. Most people that have some type of breathing condition will say they have asthma. So as soon as we find out they have asthma, I'm asking a bunch of more questions because I need to know if it's just asthma like they're saying or if it's really worse. And I'm going to tell you, half the time it's worse. It's not just asthma. So when they say, oh, I have asthma, you make sure you tell them to get your inhaler. And do you have a backup, an emergency inhaler? That's the first thing I ask. Do you have an emergency inhaler? And then they'll go, oh, yeah, but I don't use that. Guess what, guys? It's chronic. And then I'll ask them, do you do any breathing treatment? Or do you use a nebulizer? And they'll be like, oh, yeah, I got the machine over there. And, of course, you always want to ask about oxygen because oxygen is going to be a knockout with a lot of these companies. So most people won't be on oxygen. Very few will be. But that's how you find out. That's your tip. Get more information. Make sure they haven't ever been prescribed multiple inhalers, because if they've been prescribed 2 different inhalers in the past couple of years, chances are it's chronic. It's not just asthma. The insurance company is going to see that 2 years ago they were prescribed 2 different inhalers, and they're going to say, oh yeah, that's not asthma. That's COPD or worse. The third thing, so far we've talked about diabetes, breathing conditions, asthma, COPD, etc. The third most popular health condition that we see it's really mental health issues. Very, very common. Thankfully, most companies don't care about anxiety or depression or even bipolar, which is one step up. It's like anxiety and depression kind of go hand in hand. And then if they're bipolar, they could be taking medication for anxiety, depression, and the bipolar behavior. So once it evolves into something more severe than that, as in like schizophrenia, where they're being hospitalized or they're out of control, that's when the carriers want to rate them. But a lot of carriers don't care if they're under control. If it's under control, like Transamerica isn't going to be worried about it. Americo, Foresters, they're not going to be really concerned about it. Unless they're, they pull an MIB and see that they're in and out of the hospital, or something crazy is going on. That's when you're going to have an issue. So, mental health issues in most cases, not a problem. We see that a lot. Now, here's 2 things that we do see a lot that are an issue. Cancer and HIV. Let me just say it. You're looking at guaranteed issue. And if you can just keep your thought process, remember, cancer, they currently have, and HIV they've ever had, because they're always going to have it, it's guaranteed issue. Now, if they've been cancer-free for a while, all the carriers look at it differently. Over a year, you can give first day coverage with some of the companies. With most of them, I think it's going to be mainly 2 years. More than 2 years, you're giving first day coverage. If it's been over a year since they've been cancer-free, but they had cancer a year and a half, less than 2 years, a lot of companies will approve them with their graded products. And the fifth thing, and really something we see a lot, are the heart issues and stroke. I kind of put them in the same category because a lot of times they're taking the same medication. And we do have, thankfully, carriers that will look at the blood thinners as a maintenance medication. So, Transamerica and Royal Neighbors. If the prospect is taking a blood thinner like warfarin, Coumadin, clopidogrel, etc., in many cases, you can give these people standard or even preferred rates as long as the incident, the heart attack or stroke, happened 2 years ago or later. In other words, it's been over 2 years. That was when the heart attack happened, and that's when they got put on the blood thinner, and they keep taking the blood thinner to prevent the heart attack, it's considered a maintenance medication with Transamerica and Royal Neighbors. So I'm not going to get too much further into that. Let me just say this. If you're trying to get someone who's taking warfarin first aid coverage, you better make sure they don't have any other problems. No COPD, no inhaler, no diabetes, no insulin the insulin diet, forget it. It's out. It's not going to, insulin and warfarin, insulin and blood thinners, anytime you mix those two, these people are not healthy. They're in trouble. So you're not going to be able to give these folks first aid coverage. Every now and then a carrier will allow it. I like to bring up the story of the first time I wrote Royal Neighbors. Didn't know what I was doing. The lady pulled out medication. She was on insulin. She was on a blood thinner, and she had neuropathy, and I still got her first aid coverage. Somehow Royal Neighbors approved her for first aid coverage. That's one of the reasons that we like to lead with Royal Neighbors for brand new agents. That's one of the reasons I bring them up all the time, other than the fact that Royal Neighbors doesn't have the build chart. They don't care about the mental health issues, and they pay fast. Boom. Usually within 48 hours of you making the sale, they pay fast, and you don't even do any paperwork. You're sitting down with your client. You do the whole application over the phone with the client, and then you go home. Or you go to your next appointment is what you should be doing. Or you go home. But my point is, the nice thing about Royal Neighbors, once you leave the client's house, there's no paperwork to do. It's done. You've gotten the approval right there on the phone. They're going to be mailed the policy in a couple of weeks. You're going to get paid in a couple of days. Bam. That's why we like a lot of the new agents to try to learn with Royal Neighbors, at least for your first month or two, and then start looking at more and more carriers. Another heart issue, let me just bring up real quick, angina. So a lot of the carriers, if they've had angina for more than 2 years, it's also not going to be a problem. Now, let me remind you, angina, what that is that's chest pain. It's like if people that have had a heart condition or had heart attacks, the doctors, a lot of times they'll say, well, I had a chest pain first. So that tells the doctor, you might have angina. So what the doctors will do is prescribe them nitroglycerin and put them on a nitrate. And so the nitroglycerin is something that they'll keep in their pocket. And if they have chest pain, boom, they'll pop a nitro pill and they'll start feeling better. They'll start feeling relief while they're on the way to the hospital is what they're supposed to be doing. So a lot of them will just take the darn pill and not worry about going to the doctor or the hospital. They just kind of like deal with it as part of life. But if the client has angina and they've got that little nitroglycerin, you can often give them preferred rates with Transamerica, Mutual of Omaha, Sentinel, Foresters, the Aetna product, American Continental. All these companies are okay as long as they've been taking it for more than 2 years. Transamerica, if they've been taking that medication for angina for over 1 year, you can put them with their standard product. You won't be able to give them preferred, but you might be able to give them that standard product. Remember, when we're trying to look at these major health issues, we're trying to give our clients first aid coverage and they've got these major issues. Make sure they don't have other issues because the chances goes down. The odds go down. Once they have other health issues, the odds of you getting them first aid coverage decreases substantially. So yeah, we want to fight for our clients if it makes sense. Don't fight for each client if it doesn't make sense. You've got to decide, what you're going to do. You've got to know what you're going to do. It's all part of your learning process. It's all part of this underwriting process. So guys, I hope that you all got something out of this call. I hope everybody goes out and has a really good week. Let me know if you need anything. Go out there, guys. Kick some butt. Remember to put the needs of your clients first, and everything will take care of itself. Happy hunting.